Hi there, welcome back. Today we're out in Red Rock Conservation Area, National Conservation Area in Nevada. Really awesome place for multi-pitch rock climbing, trad climbing, sport climbing, you name it, fantastic. And we're talking today about working with two ropes. So this is oftentimes a little bit more advanced. It can require a selection of specific gear, and it can require use of different techniques. So speaking of, when I know that I'm going to be belaying two people and I'm going to be using two ropes to do it, there are more than one ways to do this. In this case, I'm going to use two ropes. I tend to select ropes that are a little bit skinnier. So maybe I might be out having a 9-4 rope on a 1-to-1 day guiding, but I might choose to select a rope that's more like 9.0 or 9.2, as long as there aren't any super sharp edges I'm worried about damaging the ropes with. And I tend to select ropes that are newer and more supple, especially those that have a bit of a dry treatment, because they're going to be much easier to belay with. An additional concern is the belay device you're using, and this is one common style of belay device right here, which is an ATC guide. It's a guide style device, also called a tube style device, because historically these used to be just simple tubes, and they've been since modified. And this one is a little bit of slightly older and is really well broken in. I also have what's called a Camp Ovo, which is a little bit simpler and more of a flat plate with two slots in it, and a GG, which is essentially the same, made by Kong. And I found all three of those devices, the very broken in ATC guide, the GG, and the Camp Ovo, have similar levels of friction. And the friction level is very low, which is really helpful when belaying with two ropes, because it's a lot more weight and friction you're pulling through. Last thing you'll notice here is I've got a round stock carabiner. This one's a little bit old and beat in. It's just for my practice harness here. The newer round stock carabiner that I'm really enjoying using is by Kong as well. And is it Kong? It's a Napic anyway, and it's a twist lock, and it's a very good round stock carabiner, which reduces the friction of the rope getting pulled through. So those are some considerations. Let's take a closer look at how I'm going to attach myself to these ropes for different configurations of parties of three with two ropes. So the first thing I want to consider if I'm using two ropes and belaying two guests is whether I'm going to use what's called parallel technique, which is where I am leading with both ropes attached into my harness, either tied in or one tied in and one clipped in. And then I attach it to the belay and then belay both guests simultaneously. So they're climbing at the same time, but offset just enough that if one falls, they're not going to hit the other, accounting for rope stretch. The other technique I could use is called caterpillar technique. And in caterpillar technique, I will lead on one rope and then belay one follower while that follower trails the second rope. And knowing what technique I'm going to use frequently within the route is going to determine how I'm going to attach into these ropes, whether I tie in or whether I clip in. Now, the choice between parallel and caterpillar technique is largely a one of terrain. If the terrain is traversing significantly, or if there's a lot of loose rock, then I may choose to position my belayers well out of the way in the event of loose rock, or it could be at the standard belay if it's a traverse, and then use the caterpillar technique. Because if I were in parallel and one climber were to fall, they could rake the other one off the wall if they were climbing simultaneously. It also allows me to use another technique called a back belay in order to add some security as well. If it's relatively easy terrain for me and I can bear the extra weight and friction of the two ropes, and the climbing does not have significant traverses, then I'll more likely go go parallel, because it's going to be significantly faster to get up a route. So here in Red Rock, something like Solar Slab would be a route that I would do almost entirely in parallel typically. So let's take a look at different methods of attaching to the ropes for each of those different systems. So the first technique that I might use if I was going to use the parallel technique, which is where I lead with both ropes attached to me and then belay my two followers simultaneously, is to tie into one rope and clip into the other rope. An advantage of this system is at the belay, if I need to manage something, I can easily unclip this rope, pass that bight through, around, or underneath a part of the anchor, a part of the other rope, and then clip it back in, or I can also clip it up to the anchor, or if I'm changing from a parallel system into a caterpillar system where then I'm only leading on run rope, I simply take off this and hand it to the other follower, and then I lead on this and the other follower will trail the additional rope. So I typically use this only in situations where there's significant numbers of transitions, or I'm going to be using the caterpillar system for the majority of the pitches on a route. A second way of attaching into the ropes is tying into both sides. This is more of a classic way of tying in, and there are a few advantages to this. The first is I can attach myself to an anchor with either rope, which can set me up quite well in terms of my positioning at the anchor. Another advantage to this is I can take a belay on either strand without worrying about which side might be clipped in. So in the event that my belayer is on, the left-hand side and is more associated with this bluish or purple rope, I might have them belay, or I might have the person on black belay without the need to unclip and then retie in. Another advantage of this is I can use different types of rope systems other than the standard single rope belay technique where I'm belayed on one rope. These are both ropes that are rated as single ropes, but they're also rated as double ropes and even twin ropes. They're triple rated. So if I didn't trust a belayer, for example, or I wanted to place a piece far on the right and far on the left, I could have two people belaying me at the same time, or I could clip the right rope into a piece and then the left rope into a piece. More commonly done with double ropes, but it also works with triple rated ropes like this as well. This third way of carrying the rope is common if you don't need to clip this rope into anything. So this is common in aid climbing, for example, where you're trailing a rope that you're going to use as a haul line. But it can also be used in free climbing, where you might free snake an entire pitch, where one person is cleaning all the protection and going up maybe some traverses, and the other person has the ability to climb without the need to clean any of that protection or clean it back through. And in that case, I might take this rope and clip it way back to my harness out of the way, and so I don't mix that up and start clipping it into protection, and it stays clean and clear. I'll also use this frequently in ice climbing, where maybe I'm clipping one of the ropes into a single piece of protection, a good ice screw at the top of a pitch into a logger draw, just to keep the ropes separated, where one person is cleaning the whole pitch, the other person is climbing without cleaning, maybe on a harder line until they reach the very top and clean the last ice screw. But also great in rock climbing for specific pitches. One of the hardest things about working with two ropes is the organization of the ropes at the belay. The ropes take up more room, and because you have more rope, in this case 2 60-meter ropes, that's 120 meters of rope. That results in a much higher likelihood of tangles and kinks and problems in the rope management. So having a ledge can really be helpful for that. This would be a massive ledge, which would be very uncommon. But even in the event that you don't have a massive ledge, knowing how to utilize that space can be helpful. If I have the available space and I have the available time, I may choose to separate the ropes into two separate and distinct stacks where no part of those ropes overlap one another, so they can't tangle on each other. And my general saying or expression for this is you want your stack or pile of rope to be small and tall. So if you're working with a really small, say plate-sized area, you can get all of your rope into it. And there's a few different techniques for doing that. The first is simply with your arms. You place one end of the rope off to the side, maybe we're starting a route and nobody's tied in yet, and the other arm you use to push the rope and place the rope. And when I say place the rope, what you'll see is I'm actually touching the rock each time I do this. If I throw the rope at the rock, you'll see this pile will get larger and larger over time. But by touching the rock each time, I'm placing the rope in a very specific spot. Another way of accomplishing the same thing, but with somewhat greater efficiency, is to use a redirect. The redirect could be through the anchor, or it could be off of your harness. This technique doesn't work very well if the rope is coming up a pitch of rock because of the additional friction of that rope running over the rock and the weight of the rope pulling down due to gravity. But here, going from one pile and making a tighter stack, it works quite well. So in this case, I'll redirect off of my gear loop. I find redirecting off of my belay loop positions this significantly closer to the stack and gives me a much shorter length of push to work with. So here I'll put it off to the side, and I'll do the same thing I was doing with one hand, but I'll do it with two in rapid succession. And this can get you a nice small, tall stack on a really small portion of ledge that you may not have been able to use efficiently otherwise. The other thing you can do for rope organization at a belay where you have a ledge is work with the ropes together and create a nice tight pile. Generally, if I'm belaying in parallel, where I'm belaying two guests simultaneously, I'm going to be stacking the ropes together because it's much more efficient and allows me to belay more continuously and with greater attention to my climbers than trying to separate ropes at the belay while at the same time belaying my guests. So in this case, you'll notice I'm going to use some techniques later and you'll see how these all fit together. But in this case, I want to use that same technique I was using with the single rope, stacking them into a small and tall pile. But sometimes due to the amount of rope, I might need to make the base of that pile bigger so it can support the top, almost like a pyramid. Here, if I'm trying to rack this on this longer shelf, I might make this pile in sort of two separate sections as I go. You can see I'm stacking across this ledge and I'm pairing the ropes together, treating them as one, and I'm pushing the ropes into this pile as I go. You'll see later I'm going to demonstrate a technique where I take one stack that is stacked cleanly and one stack where the ropes haven't been paired, called a dirty stack, and I'm going to put them together using this technique. So by the time my climbers arrive at the belay, most of the rope organization has already been done. You can see here, these ropes are a little bit mismatched, which means the speed at which I was pairing them was a little bit off, which over a long period of time can result in some twisting in the ropes. For a short pitch or a series of short pitches, a little bit off like that usually doesn't matter to a great degree. When using two ropes, a good consideration is how and where you construct your belay. Whenever possible, this is true of belaying with a single rope as well, whenever possible, it's nice to try to get your master point or the point of equalization in your anchor to be somewhere between, say, eye level and mid-chest level. That way, when you're belaying, you're pulling down on the brake strands rather than having to hunch over in order to pull down. If it's not possible to get your master point in that position just due to where the gear happens to be or where the bolts were placed, then another thing you can do is simply sit down beneath the anchor, get a nice comfortable position, and then you'll be pulling down. Sometimes that position can be a little bit strenuous on your shoulders over time, so consider altering and changing your position and trying to pull with your back muscles instead of with your elbows and your arms. Now, when I reach this anchor to attach myself, I like to use a locking carabiner where I rotate it so that the gate is facing out and away, and the gate is opening in this orientation as opposed to in this orientation. I call it the Captain Hook method, where you hook it and then you flip it. Hook and flip. It's out and away. Now I'm going to take the rope that is closest to the wall. So in this case, my right side is against the wall. So the rope that's tied into the right side of my harness, I'm going to reach down and grab that and clip that in and reach and grab that same rope and clove hitch it. Now I'm secured on that line, and I'm going to place this rope into the same locking carabiner without a clove hitch and lock that down. And what this allows me to do is, if I need to adjust where I am, instead of altering two clove hitches, I can simply adjust this single clove hitch. Get myself closer or further away, and this remaining parallel will be a little bit easier for me to see and manage than had I left it out of that carabiner and dangling down. The next thing I need to consider in my strategy for setting up the belay is which direction the next pitch goes. So if the next pitch is going to go to the right, then it's ideal if when I belay in my followers, I position them on the left-hand side. However, if the next pitch goes to the left, it's ideal if I belay them in to where I'm standing right now. So let's just say it's a little bit more complicated and the next pitch goes to the left, but the most comfortable spot for me to stand is on the right. What I'll do is I'll set up my ATC with the face pointing in the direction where I want my guests to end up standing. So they're going to end up standing right here. So I'm going to place that right in here, just like that. And then I'm going to start pulling up the rope. Once all that rope is pulled up and I load the device, I can simply stand on this side and belay until they're up here. And then I can move up and over the rope as needed. So let's take a look first at pulling this rope up. Adjust myself, give a little bit more slack here. Okay, so if this pitch was relatively short, so I would say relatively short means, you know, around 120 feet or less, then I tend to use this technique, which is having two separate stacks if I'm on a ledge and the ledge is big enough to accommodate two stacks. So the first stack I'm going to make, I do not want beneath the plate if I can help it. I don't want it directly underneath. And I'm going to pull these two ropes up together at the same time, and ideally I'm going to pull them up into a location which is close to where I will end up belaying and managing the rope. So I'm going to pull them up on the left hand side because the pitch is going to end up leaving to the left on the next, so I'm going to exit that way. And if the rope is over there when I leave, it'll be easier to manage. So I'm going to start pulling this up. And just like before, I'm going to use my hands and pushing it down into a nice pile. And you'll see I'm using one arm to pull the ropes up because they're heavy, and the other one pushes it into a pile. The redirect method of pulling it through a carabiner here or off the anchor tends not to work in this terrain very well with two ropes due to the weight of the ropes. So I'm just going to pull them up. This pile that I'm making right here, where the ropes are paired, I'm calling my clean pile. It's clean because if I pull on both of these ropes together, they'll feed out together, probably without much for tangles. Okay, I'm starting to come close to my climbers now, and there it is. I feel there's tension on the end. So now I'm gonna load these climbers on the side of the rope right over here where I'm gonna end up belaying them in from. Okay, because I want them to stand to the right. Load one strand at a time, and after I load the strand, if you take a look nice and close here, I'm going to put my finger through that strand to keep it from popping back out. Put another end through, keep it with my finger, and now I take the other carabiner, and while pulling with my finger against this dark colored wire, I pop the carabiner through both strands, and now they're locked in. Okay, now I can begin belaying. Now, as I belay, the pile that I make over here is going to be a dirty stack, because when I'm belaying these climbers, I might be belaying blue up first. They might climb up 15 to 25 feet before the climber on the black strand is able to climb. And if you see, this side is quite sloppy. This side is quite clean and paired. And eventually, black side is going to start to climb. If my climbers are slow, and if there are no crosses in the rope, and both climbers stop and I don't need to pay attention to the belaying of them at the same time for some period, which usually means I might have line of sight or good communication, then I may decide that I can do some rope management at the same time that I belay. But I won't always do this, especially if I have fast climbers in easy terrain. Okay, they've reached a hard spot. One of them is cleaning gear. The other one is hanging out on a ledge, I can see. So now I'm going to release the strands and grab both of these coming from my dirty stack and push them into my clean stack until one of the ropes is all used up. The other is going to have leftover. Now I can continue to belay. Oops, seems like they're still standing. Now they start moving. And I can do the same. Once I have at least 4 to 6 feet of rope, usually more, of each strand available, then I can again grab these two ropes from the clean stack, pair them, and continue to push them from the dirty stack into the clean stack until one of the ropes, black rope again, is all used up. If I continue to do this for the entire pitch, when my two followers arrive, I will have a full clean stack that all I need to do is flip if it's been stacked very neatly and nicely on a good ledge, and I'll be good to go without any additional rope management. Okay, so in this case, I have one climber that's always going to arrive before the other. So here, climber on blue is arriving before the climber on black. And now what I can do is I can tell the climber on blue, once they reach up to the belay, put a knot in to represent, I've belayed them in on the right-hand side because I'm going to leave on the left. Okay, so climber on blue can sit up here, and I can have climber on blue feed these two ropes into the stack as I continue to belay on black and pay only attention to them. Another consideration here is if there is any concern that this rope has crossed over another strand or that maybe there's a traverse into the anchor, then it's never a bad idea. Just put a blocking knot in, that if something strange happened and they leaned back, it would jam and they wouldn't go anywhere. They continue to belay black in. Well, the climber on blue, or purple, however you want to find that rope color, does my rope management for me for those last few feet. Okay, this is what climber on blue would be doing. Pairing those ropes, taking them from the dirty stack into the clean stack. Okay, and now my climber on black has arrived. I'd simply need to attach them to the anchor, which I'll demonstrate in the next part of the video, and then make sure these are fully paired, and it looks like they're pretty well matched. And now I'm going to flip these ropes just the way you would with doing a single rope, because they've been matched like a single rope. I will find the bottom of my ropes if I'm leading the next pitch, that which would be the easiest transition in this case. So my ropes are on the bottom. I'm going to find the bottom of the stack, grab the bottom of the stack, make sure I have all of it, and making sure I get a nice 90-degree flip, just like that. And now my ropes pay off the top and a nice clean unit, and I should be good to go. Here I'm going to talk a little bit about clipping two people in at the anchor when there's already a third person on the anchor. In other words, a party of three. In order to do this, I'm cleaning things up a little bit just to show one principle, which can be a little bit confusing when you're first getting used to it. So in this scenario, let's say that the leader is attached where my right hand is, and the followers are both attached where my left hand is. One thing you'll notice here is these clove hitches on the anchor, the black rope that goes to the leader here is overlapping the climber on blue. So in order, if this is the leader on the right, I'm going to call the leader an outside climber, then we have the middle or inside climber, and then we have another outside climber here. The inside climber, you'll see their rope is underneath the outside climber. The reason we're doing that is when the leader leaves the anchor and starts traveling straight up the pitch, both of those ropes come clean and parallel. The same thing is true if the leader is standing on the other side of the belay. Let's see what happens then. We switch sides of the belay, and you'll see once again that the inside climber, their rope is underneath the outside climber's rope in this instance. And then when it goes straight up, those ropes go parallel straight up the pitch, so that when they're put on belay, when either of these climbers want to climb, they can climb without their ropes being crossed or twisted.